RNZ Pacific. World, regional and sports news. I'm Ben Robinson Drawbridge. The U.S. territory of Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency as it braces for a tropical storm churning through the Caribbean Sea. The National Hurricane Center has issued a hurricane watch and tropical storm warning for Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. Forecasters expect Tropical Storm Dorian to develop into a hurricane in the next 24 hours. Puerto Rico is still recovering from Hurricane Maria, which devastated the island in 2017. Brazil has rejected an offer by some of the world's wealthiest countries to help combat fires in the Amazon. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro says he'll consider accepting aid offered by G7 nations, but first he wants an apology from the French President Emmanuel Macron. Rachel Silverman has the story.
Bolsonaro's decision to reject $20 million in aid money to battle the massive fires comes during a public spat. Macron has accused Bolsonaro of lying about fighting climate change. Bolsonaro says if Macron takes that back, he'll consider taking the aid. More than 26,000 forest fires have been recorded in the Amazon rainforest this month. The forests absorb a significant share of Earth's climate-warming carbon dioxide, and they are one of the world's greatest sources of biodiversity. Rachel Silverman, San Francisco.
The leaders of opposition parties in Britain say they've agreed to use legislation to block a no-deal Brexit. After a meeting called by the leader of the main opposition Labour Party, the leader of the Greens says the parties will work together in Parliament to stop Britain leaving the European Union without a deal. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has promised to leave the EU by the end of October with or without a deal. The Australian Foreign Minister Maurice Payne says a Sydney academic arrested in China has not been spying for her government. Yang Hengjun has been charged with espionage after being detained in Beijing for more than 7 months. The crime carries the death penalty in China. Ms. Payne says the allegations against Dr. Young are baseless.
We find it very clear that there is no basis for any allegation that Dr. Young was spying for the Australian government. And of course I can only speak for Australia, but I have no information to support an accusation that that might be the case for any other country.
Louise Payne, Australia's Foreign Minister. You're listening to RNZ Pacific. The People's National Congress Party of Papua New Guinea's former Prime Minister Peter O'Neill has been booted out of government. Mr. O'Neill's successor, James Marape, cut ties with him in a cabinet reshuffle yesterday, but the former leader says Mr. Marape has been disloyal. Corey Hawkins reports.
Peter O'Neill says appointing the opposition's finance spokesperson Ian Lenstaki in place of Sam Basil as treasurer is a gross insult to many MPs in government. He also says that in sacking Richard Maru as National Planning Minister, Mr. Marape has removed one of the hardest working ministers. According to Peter O'Neill, under his former close political ally, government direction is stalling, and that all the hard work his team put in over the past 8 years is being derailed. But Mr. Marape says Mr. O'Neill has been undermining his government from the background. This is Corey Hawkins.
The dengue epidemic declared in New Caledonia in December is officially over. This was announced by health authorities who say that since the start of the year, more than 3,800 people contracted dengue type 2. Of them, 363 needed to be admitted to hospital. A 43-year-old woman who was a senior French police officer and an 8-year-old girl died of the disease. Despite the end of the epidemic, the authorities have advised the public to remain vigilant. In February, dengue type 2 spread to Wallis and Futuna, as well as French Polynesia. A lawmaker in American Samoa says methamphetamine use in the U.S. territory is at crisis levels. The 4-4 District Faipule, Andra Samoa, says like many others on Tutuila, her village of Leone is infested with ice, as the drug is known locally. Ms. Samoa says it's become so prevalent even elementary school children are using it. She says dealers and users are widely known, yet their operations continue with some being children of local Mātai. The lawmaker says the territory lacks the infrastructure and expertise to deal with a problem that's driving a range of social and criminal issues.
We have a lot of the prisoners that are in prison because of the drugs problem, and you have the effect of the drugs ripple effect into assault, vandalism, beating up, bullying. The effect of the ice you cannot control.
That's American Samoa's Andra Samoa. Vanuatu's Foreign Minister says it's vital the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights visits West Papua soon. Ralph Regenvanu's comment comes as Papuans enter their second week of widespread protest amid ongoing conflict in the Nduga Regency. The Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet, has expressed an interest in a fact-finding mission to Papua, but her predecessor says an invitation to visit the region wasn't honoured by Indonesia. This month's Pacific Islands Forum Summit endorsed the forum to lobby for the Commissioner to visit in the next year, which Mr. Regenvanu says needs to happen.
The onus is on the Secretariat and the member states of it, including the members that are parts of the Human Rights Council, that are on the Human Rights Council, that they need to make sure the Commissioner gets to go. I mean, Indonesia should see that there is a very clear concern, and we hope that this statement will make them come to the table and work with the UN Human Rights Commissioner to make sure that mission does happen.
That's Ralph Regenvanu, Vanuatu's Foreign Minister. An MP on Mangaia and the Cook Islands says the absence of doctors in the Aru Islands is life-threatening. Te Tangi Matapo has urged the Ministry of Health to change its policy of not stationing a general practitioner on the Aru Islands or Pa Inua. Ms. Matapo says the Ministry of Education has supplied over 20 teachers to Mangaia, yet the Ministry of Health can't even provide one doctor. She says at present, to see a doctor, a patient's condition has to justify air evacuation. And one of French Polynesia's main wholesale companies has been fined for abusing its dominant market position. In its first ever ruling, the competition watchdog fined the WAN Group $2.3 million. That's news from RNZ Pacific. Now with sport, here's Vinnie Wiley.
Thank you, Ben. Papua New Guinea are odds-on to win the Oceania Rugby Cup after overcoming Niue 29 points to 10 in a top-of-the-table clash in Port Moresby to make it back-to-back wins with a round to play. The Pucks only led by 5 points to 3 at the half-time interval, but scored 4 tries in the second spell, including in the final play of the match. Niue's captain Luca Gibbs says they had some good signs in the first half and failed to capitalise on a series of chances.
It was definitely a hard, physical game, fast game. It's what we expected. Hats off to our team. We played everything we had out there. We didn't come away with the result that we wanted. I guess a few missed opportunities. But the game could have gone either way. But I mean, full credit to PNG. They're definitely a good side, and we knew they'd be a hard nut to crack.
PNG's next opponents, Solomon Islands, thumped Nauru 61 points to 7 in the earlier kick-off and are second in the standings, needing a big win over PNG on Saturday to have any chance of winning the competition. The men's 8th seed Stefanos Tsitsipas has been dumped out in the first round of the US Tennis Open in New York, with the Greek losing in 4 sets to Russia's Andrei Rublev. Spain's 10th seed Roberto Bautista was also ousted in 5 sets by Alexander Bublik of Kazakhstan, while defending women's champ Naomi Osaka needed 3 sets to defeat Russia's Anna Pliskova. Mate Ma'atonga Rugby League coach Christian Wolf will take charge of the Newcastle Knights for the last 2 games of the NRL regular season, after head coach Nathan Brown announced yesterday he would leave the club immediately. Brown had originally last week announced he'd leave the team at the end of the season, but he tendered his immediate resignation on Tuesday after players were accused of lacking effort in their 42-point loss to the West Tigers at the weekend, which all but killed off their finals hopes. The Knights are in 11th place, 3 points adrift of the top 8 with 2 rounds to play. The United States Women's Football International Carly Lloyd has been asked by an NFL team to kick in their final pre-season game. The 37-year-old, 2-time World Cup winner was invited to an NFL training session last week, and a clip of her kicking a 50-metre field goal went viral. The 2015 World Football Player of the Year was then approached by several NFL teams. Although women have played at university and professional level, they are yet to play in a pre-season or regular season NFL match. And Tiger Woods has had a knee operation last week, but is expected to make a full recovery and is hopeful of being back competing in October. Men's golf #1 said he had an arthroscopic procedure to repair minor cartilage damage. Apart from his Masters win in April, the 43-year-old had a relatively subdued season, with injuries hampering his preparation and performances. Woods withdrew from a tournament earlier this month due to pain and stiffness in his surgically repaired back. That's the latest in sports news here on RNZ Pacific. For more, head to rnzi.com. Welcome to Dateline Pacific. I'm Koroi Hawkins. Rights groups say internet cuts in Indonesia's West Papua are repressive. We look at Tonga's ongoing struggle to recover from Cyclone Gita. A Fiji opposition MP feels vindicated by video showing an altercation with the Prime Minister which had been disputed. A giant pumice raft has surfaced after a submarine volcano erupted near Tonga, and efforts are underway to resurrect the remote Bougainville library which was washed away by the sea. Rights groups say an internet blackout in Indonesia's West Papua marks a dangerous violation of free speech protections. Restrictions were imposed by Indonesia earlier this month as protests escalated in response to racism towards Papuans. Mackenzie Smith reports.
As demonstrations across Papua enter their second week, thousands turned out on Monday in several of the region's biggest centres. In Paniai Regency, a video posted by human rights lawyer Veronica Korman showed hundreds performing a Waita dance and shouting "Free Papua." But elsewhere, the flow of information has slowed to a trickle after the government cut internet access across Papua last Wednesday. The editor of local newspaper Tabloid Jubi, Victor Mambor, says the blockage has made getting information out of the region hard.
When we talk about journalism, to send the real, the truth information about West Papua. But now we cannot do it. There's many information from the group. They send it to me, but we cannot clarify the information. There's problems for journalism.
Mr. Mambor this week took a complaint over the internet restrictions to the UN Special Rapporteur on freedom of expression. Indonesia argues its measure is necessary to prevent the spread of fake news, which could trigger more violence. But rights groups say the internet has been used as a tool of repression. Amnesty International describes the blackout as an appalling attack on free speech. The executive director of free speech group SafeNet, Damar Juniato, says reporters aren't the only people being affected.
There's a lot of students in Papua that using long-distance learning, using the online, the internet. They cannot do study. And a lot of business like tourism that cannot get a payment from the Airbnb.
New Zealand MP Golriz Garman says internet blocks often preempt grave brutality by states.
We need to notice that if people are being cut off from communicating with the rest of the world, that abuses against them can then happen sort of in the dead of night, so to speak, and we won't know, and that is scary.
Hundreds of police reinforcements have been flown into Papua since the unrest began last week. The demonstrations were started after a group of Papuan students in the Javanese city of Surabaya were called monkeys, tear-gassed and then arrested. A military spokesperson told Reuters on Monday that 5 soldiers are being investigated over the incident. But journalist Victor Mambor says the government is letting the incident slide by prioritising an internet cut.
I think this is a kind of discrimination against West Papuan people. They're looking for the perpetrators who say monkey to all people. They should arrest them, not to block the internet.
Meanwhile, conflict in Papua's Central Highlands, another trigger behind the recent tensions, has once again broken out. Activists and local media said on Monday a French military and police operation in Puncak Regency has displaced more than 800 Papuans. This is Mackenzie Smith.
Many people on Tonga's main island are continuing to struggle with makeshift facilities 17 months after Cyclone Gita struck. The cyclone caused widespread damage on Tonga Tapu, affecting businesses, schools and homes. Our correspondent in Tonga, Kalafi Moala, told Don Wiseman about the problem still being experienced by many Tongans.
The main places of damage that really need picking up what a lot of the schools. And you're talking about primary or elementary schools, talking about high schools with buildings and classrooms that are in disrepair. And in order to meet the needs then, when the damage happened, they built tents. They put tents in there to replace these classrooms while they're getting that fixed. Now it's almost a year and a half, and the tents are still there. And there are teachers that are now beginning to speak out concerning why things not fixed. There was one school that I approached, and they say that the Parent Teachers Association were willing to raise money to fix classrooms, but they were told don't do that because government got already a plan to get it fixed. But then that's over a year ago now.
What do we know about government plans to finally repair them?
Well, the contact was made already, and the word is that we're working on it. And I do not think that it's necessarily the lack of funds, because there's a lot of organizations from overseas that have either given funds or have promised to give funds. I think it's just a lack of coordination on the ground. What is of priority, what needs to be done. But then when you move from the schools on to look at areas in the various villages and townships, that's the area where I live in, is called Tongataiapa in the main town of Nuku'alofa. Our whole neighborhood, and I've gone and done the inspection, every single house there had major damages. There's a neighbor with a 3-bedroom house, and they're all sleeping in the lounge, and all the other rooms are leaking, and they don't have enough money to fix the leak. So when it rains, it's just like it's a rain indoor. So that is a very common situation. And previously, there was an attempt by the government, of course, to give actual cash to Tongans to fix their houses. One neighbor who still has a leaking roof, I said, what did you do with the $500 that was given to you? He said, well, I went to pay off my bill, my electricity bill was there, and I didn't have any money left to fix my roof. And that's a very common situation throughout Tonga.
Particularly for the government itself.
Yes.
So this situation, from the sound of it, we could be talking about the same thing in a year's time.
We could be. Well, one thing that I think is important to note, there was a cyclone called Ian that took place in 2017, and it hit Hawaii, the northern islands of Hawaii. Interesting things when Gita happened, and all the people start talking about the repairs, Hawaii people send in a communique with the government and say, the houses that we had damaged from Cyclone Ian in 2017, it's still down. Nothing has been done yet, despite the promise. So here we have another cyclone that hit us in 2018, and then now we're in 2019. The damages from both cyclones are still there. Who knows, there could be another cyclone at the end of the year or the beginning of next year. And it's a real crisis situation when you think about it.
There's been a lot of criticism directed at the Prime Minister over this particular issue, hasn't there? Because he raised the matter about the impact of climate change while he was at the forum.
That's correct. Our needs locally, Don, is something that we can fix locally. It's not because of a lack of money. I think part of it, twofold, is a lack of prioritizing those things and organizations that will carry out the project and get it done. If we become successful in getting Australia to close down the coal mines, it's going to do nothing, absolutely nothing about fixing the damage that's affecting the many, many hundreds of homes here in Tonga that has been damaged so far.
A Fiji opposition MP says he's been vindicated by the release of a video of his alleged assault by the Prime Minister. Footage emerged on Friday of Frank Bainimarama grabbing and shoving Teo Tikondundua outside Parliament earlier this month. Mackenzie Smith has more.
The video, which was released by a Facebook page critical of the government, shows Frank Bainimarama marching over to Teo Tikondundua. The Prime Minister then grabs the National Federation Party member by the lapel of his jacket and gives him a light shove. Since Mr. Tikondundua claimed in Parliament on August 9 that he was assaulted that day, the government has denied any wrongdoing. The governing Fiji First Party called it a blatant lie, and Mr. Bainimarama insisted he only spoke sternly with the opposition MP. But Mr. Tikondwandwa says the video proves his critics wrong.
Now that the video has come out, I think it's told exactly the same story that I've said from day one, including my statement to the police. So I think in a way it has, sort of cleared me,
Since Mr. Tikondwandwa lodged a police complaint, an investigation has been launched and the parliamentary speaker is reviewing CCTV footage of the incident. The opposition MP wouldn't be drawn on what action should be taken.
I hope that the police will do their work, will do their job, the requirement under the law, given the complaint that I had already lodged with them.
Lawyer and government critic Aman Ravindra Singh says that will never happen. He says the Prime Minister should be charged with assault and intimidation.
If the shoe was on the other foot and the other bloke had done the same to the Prime Minister, pushed him and shoved him and swore him and cussing him and all that, this guy would still be in jail right now. He would have been picked up, processed, charged.
Police, the parliamentary speaker and the Prime Minister's office haven't responded to requests for comment. A police spokesperson told the Fiji Times only the police commissioner, Sitiveni Ngiliho, could answer questions and he was overseas. Their silence has riled some, including Fijian human rights advocate Washika Deal. She says in Fiji there's a culture of leaders having effective criminal immunity.
Many coup perpetrators, for instance, have evaded all forms of accountability and justice, and this has trickled down into many other facets. So this includes cases involving criminal intimidation, assault, and so forth.
But experts say the release of the video will make it harder for the government to avoid taking action. For example, it appears to contradict Mr. Bainimarama's claim that Mr. Tikondwandwa broke his own glasses. The footage shows his glasses falling out of his pocket and onto the concrete moments after the Prime Minister grabbed him. During the incident, about 6 security guards looked on but made no attempt to intervene. This is Mackenzie Smith.
A large raft of pumice is floating in the Pacific after an underwater volcano eruption near Tonga earlier this month. Within a week, the raft was twice the size of New York's Manhattan, according to NASA satellite images. The space agency reports photos describing a rubble slick made up of rocks from marble to basketball sizes, such that water was not visible, as well as a smell of sulfur. New Zealand volcanologist for GNS Science, Dr. Brad Scott, talked with Jenny Meyer about the submarine eruption.
It first became apparent to cruising yachties, people sailing in the Tonga area around the 9th of August. Although some of their online discussions suggest they may have actually seen some steam plumes as early as the 7th of August.
And it seems like there are quite big masses of this floating pumice. Is this something that happens? Is this one of the key indicators of an undersea eruption?
Yeah, that's right. Quite commonly, submarine volcanic eruptions produce pumice at the surface. It'll pour out the pumice from the active vent for, hours, or usually in the order of hours, maybe even days in extreme circumstances. And they often are reported or can be seen from the satellite to be covering several square kilometres to tens of square kilometres. Sometimes the raft might be between, say, 10 and 50 kilometres long, things like that. They grow with time, so as the sea currents and wind spreads them out.
So it drifts from its original source. Where's the source volcano, do you think?
The source volcano is in Tonga, to the northwest of the main island, in Australia, where there was a submarine eruption in 2001 also. So it's an area of known volcanism.
And so for yachties in the area who might come across it, what's the best thing for them to do? Go round it, or?
They tend to take different approaches. The National Maritime Coordination Centre has been aware of it and monitoring it, and I imagine they've been putting out notice to mariners, but that's a pretty normal procedure that those sort of people will say, hey, there's a submarine eruption here, there's a pumice dropping after it, and it's a personal choice for the yachties whether they sail through it or sail around it.
And any indication that this volcano might do more or become more active?
I'm not completely familiar with the 2001 eruption, but from memory that was relatively short-lived. This one appears to have basically been only the one eruption. There is an indication there may be a couple of vents active
but that's not clear at the moment. But usually these eruptions are relatively short-lived.
And you said that there was some steam seen as well.
That's right. Some of the web page Facebook chatter amongst the cruising yachts suggested that on the 7th they saw clouds of steam, on the horizon, whereas they didn't encounter the pumice, I think, until the 9th, so like 2 days later.
And that's a normal kind of progression of something like this?
Yeah, well, it would basically depend on how close a cruising yacht is to the area. If it's relatively close to the vent, it may see it the longest way away. They'll see it a day or two before they get to the area.
In the bigger picture, this early August eruption, Tonga, do you think it signals anything else in terms of activity in the area? Volcanoes, earthquakes, that kind of thing?
This would be very much business as usual. Submarine eruptions occur every sort of maybe 5 to 10 years in the Tonga environment. There's other submarine volcanoes south of Tonga back towards the Kermadec that we know are pretty frequently active. So it's not out of the ordinary really for that area at all.
What's the usual pattern there with these things as this, huge mass of pumice floats around in the ocean?
Just depending on where the eruption is, what the prevailing winds are, the prevailing currents, it'll turn up in other countries. Quite often they turn up in Fiji, they turn up in Australia, sometimes they turn up down here. It really just depends on the relative position of the eruption, the currents and the weather patterns at the time.
Does it go underneath into the ocean as well? Does it have like a depth to it?
What you're seeing is the pumice raft, material floating on the surface. It's normally just a few centimetres, tens of centimetres thick, but some of the pumices will become saturated with time and they will sink to the sea floor, but anything that remains buoyant will just wash up on the beach somewhere.
And they can be quite big, these lumps, can't they?
Yeah, the pumice sizes can vary from sort of ball-bearing marble size up to basketball size.
Technologist Dr. Brad Scott. Taku, or Mortlake Island, is one of the most remote places in Papua New Guinea's autonomous region of Bougainville. It is more than 250 kilometers east of Buka, the main town in Bougainville. Taku is an atoll and has experienced some of the most damaging effects of the climate crisis, not least in 2010 when a king tide swept over the island's library, which had been a vital feature of the community since the 1960s. David Moreno, who represents Taku in Buka, told Don Wiseman about the work to re-establish the library.
Well, the library that we had, the significance of that library, it was built back in the early 1969. That was the only facility that supports not only the school, but as well the entire community. There are times when the island is completely cut off from communication, and due to poor shipping services to the island can remain completely isolated. So the importance of having those books, the library, it becomes a source of building knowledge capacity, and it supports everyone in whatever areas in terms of education. So back in 2010, the island encountered some natural catastrophe, that is the king tide that swept the northern east part of the island where the library is located, and some of the buildings were completely destroyed. The library was one of those buildings that got totally washed off, and since then, 2010, we made an attempt to build up a library, but we never had a chance of getting some good assistance from the government to support us with filling up the library.
The library at this point, what's it got in it?
We've got some limited books. Some of those books were the ones that were washed away, so we had to clean them up, dry them out, and then put them back on shelf. And since we got the assistance from Unity Library...
And Unity Library, that's the library in Buka.
Yes, that's right. That's a public library.
And that has left you with some books, but not nearly enough. You want more.
That's right.
What are you doing about that?
We're still hoping that we can source out some book donations from donor partners in Bougainville or outside of Bougainville, because the only book donation that we got from Unity Library, it's just 20 cartons. We had been looking at, encyclopedias, atlases, books into geography, all these sort of assorted books. And Mortlake was one of the islands that had one of the best library because the community takes ownership of that library by looking after it and taking care of those books as the source of enhancing learning capacity and all this.
David, in addition to this work you're doing in terms of trying to restock the library, you are also representing the atolls, Taku and the others, on issues of climate change, and these are issues that are very critical for people on those low-lying islands, aren't they?
That's right.
Tell me a little bit about the work you're doing to try and combat climate change there.
Together with the locals, we have to identify which sort of projects that we need. For instance, one of the priority projects that we identified in Motor Island is the waterfront seawall that needs to be upgraded into a more concrete wall. So what we're doing is that we need to scope up that project, put every document together, and then seek possible donors. There are opportunities that we have like small grant incentives. So our idea is working with the locals on the island, identify those priority projects, and then because we are more based on the mainland, Buka, it is our job now to go and see the government or the donor partners to help us with those projects. Due to the isolation of those islands, we keep on missing out on those opportunities every year because the local community governments are not represented on the island, and a lot of opportunities they get missed out. So our aim is to bridge that gap and work in partnership with the government, the donor partners, and by linking them directly to the people on the island.
Moreno, who represents Tuku in Buka. In that straight line from Arctic Pacific. So far. Big fella, hello through and welcome everyone to Melanesia Update. Mikoroy Hawkins. The program today, we look at sample of the big fella stories around the region, and behind by Migolo team lo Buzz FM lo Vanuatu. In the Pacific Regional News for Pigeon, Mikoroy Hawkins. 6 former opposition MP of the been joining government lo Papua New Guinea, lo one for a big fella cabinet reshuffle where we look at National Planning Minister Richard Maru, and we've been losing position Blahem Cabinet Saking Yahan Kam and Prime Minister James Marape. And we look for cutting ties within PNC party, bloc former Prime Minister Peter O'Neill. Mr. Maru has been most senior minister from PNC. Mr. Marape's party him should leave him now coalition government from him saying he got a bad influence. And we've been accusing Mr. Maru for working with him, Mr. O'Neill, with him at opposition MPs, Patrick Pratch, with him Belden Nama, for undermining government behind. This was the most prominent promotion for my opposition and carrying MP in Lingstakina had been sworn in as a treasurer. Mr. Lingstaki may replace him Sam Basil when we just took part of meetings as part of Australian PNG Ministerial Forum this week. No more. Mr. Basil may take over the planning portfolio where Mr. Maru had been leading. Police of Fiji Okatiot Goet for gathering evidence. This was alleged assault against him opposition MP. Perhaps the Prime Minister him doing and come behind video footage him being come out. Lo Frank Bainimarama and saw him hold him and grab him and push him. Mr. Pioti couldn't go outside the parliament. Earlier this month, on for a statement on Tuesday, Police Commissioner Stephen Doliho and we tell them that the investigators have been gathering statements lo evidence. And we said this one may complete our file by any Senate public prosecutor for sanctioning. And first time police have been publicly comment since it announced in our investigation law August number 9 incident here. One fellow government minister of Solomon Islands have been acquitted this morning of multiple charges law conversion. Lawyer blame him being successfully arguing that any case for answer against the Minister of Traditional Governance, Peace and Ecclesiastical Affairs, Samuel Malito Ali. MP Brogabugotul Isabel had been arrested last year and now charging him with the 18 for occurrence for conversion, and we relate to around $12,480 with law constituency funds. The police have been say have been using one for a private Christmas party 2014. And talk after the ruling no honera, Council by Mr. Malito Ali, Leslie Kwaga, and we tell him that case here was nothing put him together good no more, and him surprised now that ought been charging client for him. Office for Director of Public Prosecutions oversaid by look at law this ruling if about appealing within next 14 days. Mr. Quagmire said that main complainant Jimmy Dikamana had been worker for Mr. Manitali as a constituency development officer, but had been sacking him from him being stealing constituency funds. And the fact and the fact that this was a case when he been come out during the election year too, let me say him look straight. The Police Commissioner of Vanuatu, Albert Nalpini, had been appealing termination blame. This on him Caribbean Supreme Court had been refusing one for a judicial review. The Post newspaper and reporting that court had told him that Mr. Nalpini had been discontinued from what claimed that him got bias from Police Service Commission with him disciplinary committee. This will court him stopping him too from proceed with him further action or revising not claim that this will be. Lawyer Mr. Nalpini, journalist Napuati, and been filing for application for judgment for set aside and of course him. And he said he believe that court of the wrong law decision blockade. Member of Parliament Law Nauru, Lionel Animea, had been sworn in as a new president Law Nauru. He replaced him Barang Wanga, where he been losing seat Blahem Law General Election Saturday. Mr. Animea had won for a second term MP and been defeating David Adiang, the 12 to 6 in one for a parliamentary vote. Speaker Hemi, former President Marcus Stephen, where he been winning a vote by 12 votes, no 7 over Shadlog Benike. Mr. Animea won for a former Secretary of Justice and he been served as an Assistant Minister, a lot of the different portfolios inside the previous government. With the rights groups of Katatalan that internet blackout in West Papua, Indonesia, and the one for a dangerous violation law free speech protections. Indonesia have been argued that this for a measure was imposing last Wednesday by stopping the spread look at rubbish information and not false information that not protest that go at around in West Papua. But Amnesty International said this for a blackout and one for a rubbish attack for freedom of expression. Executive Director of Free Speech Group SafeNet, Namra Juaniato, and tell him that outage and guaranteed for the impact. Namra Juaniato said government has been overreaching now. This blame them in the internet of Papua. Foreign Minister of Vanuatu is important to us that you have a Commissioner for Human Rights and must visit him West Papua quick time. Freaking Brano and then making up comments here. That Papuans at now make a 2-week long widespread protest middle of ongoing conflict in Dunga Regency. Commissioner Michelle Bachelet has been expressing interest for finding a mission for World Papua. At last, Commissioner Mitalamon for the early invitation from Indonesia, but nothing followed the mark. The Pacific Islands Forum Summit just finished Konoma, out of being endorsing now. Lobby for Commissioner for Mass visit law next year, and Mr. Regenbanu say this one must happen quick time. Governor Blomadang, Peter Yama, he told him that Otas village from Ramu Nickel Mine, one for the worst environmental disaster below Papua New Guinea. This one will come after water being spilled inside one for creek when it 10 inside the Red Sea, and this only one for a big threat to marine life, as well as life for villages. Reporting that Mr. Yamal had been called a government for mass quick time closing down the Chinese government owned and operated Ramu Nickel project because of the poor environmental record. The company had operated illegally. The mining agreement blame had been expired in April of this year. Mr. Yama had pointed out to that company had guaranteed 10-year tax holiday finish and had making billions of profits and had nothing to them no more people behind. And the only reward the company in giving Noma, Basamuk Bay, where reckless spillage for highly toxic waste can go inside the sea. Defense Minister of Australia had been arrived at Solomon Islands for a 2-day visit for part of the Pacific to Blahem, and the Reynolds had been traveled out Golo, Boston Province, where he look exercise coast watches with him joint training operation between Solomon Islands Police with him Australian Defence Force. And this fella bilateral army-led exercise now for developing capability for 2 fella security forces, everyone for planning and conducting and supporting with remote policing activities, law enforcement, within skills for humanitarian assistance, within disaster relief, within poor for building of people-to-people links. Senator Reynolds and me too within Solomon Islands Police and National Security Minister Lanel Tamangada, law home electric Dehemogizo Colombangara. Earlier this month, Mrs. Tanangada had been visiting now Senator Reynolds to Australia. Before Solomon Islands, Senator Reynolds had been visiting Papua New Guinea as part of Problem. And him now Pacific Regional News Division from Pacific. And him now at the top stories here today from R.NEW Pacific. This time they joining now team from Buzz FM Radio.
Vanuatu Nightly News, proudly brought to you by Digital Vanuatu.
In the headline, police investigating alleged shooting. Governance structure to be established on research for National University. Director happy with health comparison. 37 professional golfers participating in the Vanuatu Open. And the Market House open. Critics wrong with lost and found items. Welcome to the Vanuatu Nightly News on 96.3. Leading our news this evening, the Vanuatu Electoral Office is organizing 2 elections next month in Shefa and Sanma Province. The first election is the Efate Rural by-election, which has a budget of 14 million Batu, with 30,000 registered voters, followed by the Luganville municipal election. The Electoral Office confirms it received the ballot papers for the Efate Rural and Offshore Islands by-election yesterday. The chairman of the Vanuatu Electoral Commission, Mr. Martin Tete, would like to remind voters in the Efate Rural and Offshore Islands constituency that polling day will take place on Monday the 2nd of September 2019. All 29 polling stations will be officially open to voters at 7:30 a.m. and will close at 4:30 p.m.
Logistical arrangement. We are now at the fifth bullet point in the division of the commission. Actually, the commission has already declared the names of the qualified candidates, and also campaign is now on. The campaign suddenly commenced on the 16th of August, and will close at midnight on the 30th of August 2019. And polling will take place on the 2nd of September 2019.
He confirms that the ballot boxes and ballot papers were used to cast votes by the 30,000 registered voters are ready.
The ballot boxes are now ready, and also the printing of ballot papers are already in stock at the Electoral Office.
Despite the calling of Parliament by the Prime Minister on the same day of the Efate Rural going to close, the election is still going ahead as planned.
Actually, I think the Electoral Commission has already made its decision on the month of July. So, actually, we have already announced the date, we have legalized the date, and therefore our decisions are
Mr. Tete says only 7 applications were received and screened and all met the election criteria. This will be the second by-election organized after the general election after the by-election held on Tana. Tete says logistic arrangements are ready.
I think the logistics set by the Electoral Commission have complied with, and several parties have assisted the Electoral Office with the names of the presiding and polling clerks, and the timing of the polling clerks and presiding officers will be done tomorrow, Wednesday. They will be ready to man the polling station on the 2nd of September.
There are 29 polling stations in Efate Rural and over 60 presiding and polling clerks to be posted at each polling station. Regarding the Luganville municipal election, the Electoral Commission is currently conducting screening of 71 candidates that have applied to contest the municipal election. The state-owned vehicle driven by the leader of opposition had its windshield damaged last month, with a projectile leaving a small hole in one of the windshields and shattering the other. At this stage, police are still investigating the cause of damage or the motive behind it, amid allegations that a gun may have been used in the incident. Leader of opposition, MP Ismail Kotsaka, says the rear windshield of his official vehicle was found shattered on a Saturday morning in July. This damage was discovered after visiting relatives at Kaleni. Mr. Kalsakau says the police was informed and they inspected the vehicle and are carrying out an investigation. Last week, the Vaturisu Council of Chiefs issued a press statement expressing concern over the incident. The Council of Chiefs appealed to the relevant government authorities to take appropriate action to deal with the people involved. In his response to the Vaturisu Council of Chiefs on state television, Minister for National Security Andrew Napwat said he treats the incident as very serious. Researchers and government department directors participated in a consultation regarding how research will be undertaken in the Vanuatu National Bilingual University. This consultation was opened by the Minister of Education and Training, Jean-Pierre Nirua, who highlights the fact that research needs to be coordinated. He also urges that it is necessary to develop national frameworks, policies, and strategies to promote PhD studies and to improve student access to publications. This process follows the decision of the Council of Ministers on the 20th of September 2018, which approved the policy to establish a higher education, training, and research bill. It was agreed that the Ministry of Education and Training will play a leading role in establishing the governance structure of this new research sector. Last week, the Ministry of Health successfully held its first health symposium in Australia over 5 days. Health professionals and staff from the 6 provinces attended the symposium, where the problems and needs were voiced by professionals in their daily ongoing services to the community. Director for Curative and Hospital Services, Russell Samata, says Vanuatu has come a long way to produce more local consultants than before.
The first thing we need to know and understand is the Ministry of Health is one of the biggest sector of the government. And then the second thing we need to know is the people who work within the ministry, especially the professionals, are really proper level. So the decisions the government needs to do is we have to consider all those factors. When we are recruiting someone, it has to be specialized. And this was specialized is very important, I would say, because you cannot just take in anyone to put him in the lesson, anyone to put him in the professional areas in health, because we are just.
In terms of human resource, he says the government at this point is looking at filling in positions that will provide the minimum service to the people, but this service is quality.
So we are trying to spread our nurses across. For instance, I'll give you an example. When you look at the health centers, in a health center you would have a nurse practitioner, a midwife, and a registered nurse. But when you are in specific resources like this, you have to be vigilant to see what can you do to at least still provide that health service in that area to give to the population, but of quality.
This means that resources will have to be spread to ensure it reaches all corners of Vanuatu. He says they make sure one qualified person is available at health centers.
When we talked about the clinical areas in terms of the clinicians and doctors, I would say, Vanuatu has progressed very well since independence. You don't find any more of our expert doctors anymore. You have consultants, like local consultants, but there's something that we should be proud of. I believe a lot of people don't see this and don't know this, but I'm so happy. At the moment you have, you people to the hospital and ask, you can look on operations. In the past, you would find an expert to actually operate on you, but at the moment when you call, they are all new friends. Actually, they are actually consultants. They get the master's of project level. That's right.
The master says there are junior and senior consultants.
When you look at the teaching levels, then you see the gaps. But when you look at the number of doctors we have there, so it is something that we have to rationalize ourselves on more on how can we give the best service to the people, a value proposition to the people when they needed it. But at the moment, we have a goal of the increase at the moment. So we are trying to get them out already, but because the requirement we have to, according to our requirement, they have to be skilled, community skills. So they have to face all the the medical challenge, the clinical challenge that everyone's doing. We want to help them to get the best doctors to produce in Vanuatu. So Dr. Kim, so we have to put them in the community.
He says the ministry is now trying to tell doctors and nurses practice in other areas apart from being consultants. There are local consultants to provide assistance to these interns once they go out into the fields to provide service to the people. The Vanuatu Golf Open begins today at the Port Vila Golf and Country Club on the road towards mainland. The committee reports that a full field of 47 professionals and 143 amateurs will tee it up for this year's event. Committee Chairman Brian Best, who has been assisting to run this event for the past 16 years, this was one of the biggest fields ever assembled and would be a huge boost to the economy of Vanuatu, as golfers tend to be quite social with plenty of stories to tell at the 19th, whether they have played well or badly. This week kicks off with a welcome cocktail party at the Holiday Inn, and this is followed by the Swire Shipping Pro-Am on Wednesday, and the main event running through on Thursday, the 29th, till Sunday, the 1st of September. Entry to the public is free and welcomed by the organizers. And finally, the management staff of the Port Vila Market House have praised the public for returning a wallet containing over 270,000 vases. The latest purse, lost and found, containing 15,000 vases cash and important personal belongings inside, was done yesterday. The same employees wish to caution members of the public who are not aware against taking any valuables unattended, since surveillance cameras throughout the interior of the market now make it almost impossible to hide anything without being caught. They appeal to the public to report any missing items to the management office so that it can be announced on the PA system to be recovered. Employees point out that the market has become one of the sites that more and more tourists visit, and returning a lost item to one of them is a plus, for which makes the New Vanuatu unique to visitors. This brings us to the end of the Vanuatu Nightly News on 96.3 Buzz FM. I'm Charles Hakwa. Have a pleasant evening.
And that was the Nightly News, proudly brought to you by Digital Vanuatu.
And him now, Melanesian Update Program with Corey Hawkins. Thank you so much for tuning in. These are Kasim Okata up-to-date news and current affairs on our website, Bamifala, rnzi.com. And we follow staff too on Facebook and on Twitter. Just search him at RNZ Pacific.